While everybody's taking their seat, thank you all for coming. Apologies for, well, the messy start today. Things were not quite working the way we like to, which happens sometimes. But thank you all for coming. It's great to see you all. Great to be here again. May look slightly different than usual coming before, but you can still see all the slides, and hopefully it doesn't look too bad on YouTube either. So with that said, as always, I want to start by acknowledging country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, the Melbourne AWS user group acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. The in-person meetup, where we all are here, is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, in which to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land. We pay our respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders today. Additionally, just by being here, you acknowledge that you will follow our code of conduct. Our code of conduct, a short version here, longer version on the web, very short version. Be nice to each other. If, however, you feel like somebody else is not following this code of conduct, please reach out to one of us. We all wear these lovely shirts. My co-hosts are at the back there. Or you can do it anonymously over the form on the website. We are online as well. If you are following this online, you probably figured that out. With our websites, with the easy to remember URL of melp.awsug.au, and various variations for that on LinkedIn, Mastodon, and YouTube, where you can easily find us and see what's upcoming and what we'll be doing next. For today, we'll be starting with introductions. That's what I'm doing now. I didn't update this slide because it's not just after reInvent. It's the What's New section is for what was new this month, not since December. So it would not make much sense. After that, we have Bharat, who will take us through some fun stuff with the well-architected framework. And Matt, who will be talking about whether or not this whole generative AI thing is just hype and we should really get some other things in our What's New feeds these days. As always, we'll end with a quick marketplace where we'll give people the chance to mention that they are hiring. We do it this way around, where people say, hey, I'm hiring, so that you, if you're looking for a job, but happen to be sitting here next to your manager or somebody who doesn't know that you're looking for a job, we avoid that awkwardness by just doing it the other way around. Then we'll close for the night and we'll all go have fun elsewhere, at home. And that's what just happened here. I feel like my slides just disappeared from the screen. So I am sharing screen. Yep, it was just Zoom being Zoom, and maybe I clicked on something by accident that I did not mean to, which is, I believe, the definition of accident. When our speakers speaking, always, yes, you can ask questions. Generally speaking, it is good to leave them until the end, unless the speaker says otherwise. This is because very often you will have a question that will be answered on the next slide. And interrupting the speaker to say, hey, this will be in the next slide is not very useful. If you're watching this online, you can ask questions in our Slack, which I'll come back to later, or in the YouTube chat. But of course, I also want to thank our sponsors, our gold sponsor, Mental Group, as well as our silver sponsor, CVAL, and of course, our venue sponsor, NAB. Without these three companies, this would not be possible, and we're lucky enough to have both of our sponsors today presenting, which is always awesome. So really, thank you for helping us out. I mentioned Slack. You can easily join our Slack, which has over 1,000 members, and depending on the day of the week, can be quite busy, can be quiet. Got lots of specific channels where you can follow the latest that's going on. So if you haven't joined yet, I recommend you do that. Apologies. Get involved. We're always looking for, the main thing we're always looking for is speakers. It may look scary standing here. It's not so bad. People here are lovely. Just look at yourself. Do you think you're a lovely person? All the people around you are the same. So yeah, if you have a talk, please reach out to us. If you have an idea about a talk and want to work it out a bit, we're always happy to help with that. Or if you want some advice on how to build a presentation that works, also just reach out. We are very happy to help with that. We always love it when new speakers come, and all our speakers at one point spoke for the first time. So yeah, come and join us as speakers. Sponsors, if you are looking to sponsor, or your company most likely, individuals don't usually sponsor, please reach out as well. And volunteers are always welcome as well. Some months we need more volunteer work than other months, or there are also other tasks than just running the meetup that we can use help with. Some upcoming events. Reinforce will be in a couple of weeks. If you don't have tickets yet, I don't know if you can get them anymore, or plane tickets that are affordable at this stage. But it's generally considered a fun event, and there's usually another conference right next door as well. Not this year? Oh, I thought it was.
With Virginia, I think.
Okay.
Somewhere near the same.
Okay, so they went to elsewhere. Well, then it's just Reinforce. Can still go there. Well, if those tickets are available. reInvent is also coming this year. Big surprise, I know. Registration for reInvent actually opens next week. So if you're quick, you can get your tickets, which are very expensive. I would recommend asking your bosses to pay. The tickets themselves are expensive, and going to Las Vegas in a busy week is also expensive. But if you have never been, definitely worth going. Closer to home, what do we have? AWS Programming and Tools Meetup will be talking about power tools for AWS Lambda. It's a workshop run by Michael Walmsley. He has given a talk about this very same subject at this meetup in previous years. These days, he's a serverless hero as well, so that means most likely he knows what he's talking about. No, Michael is a good guy, and he definitely knows what he's talking about. So if you can make it and are interested, be good. Women in Cloud meetup is also back on the 5th of June. Based on the name, you will understand that the audience is limited. But if you or somebody you know is interested, my understanding is they'll be talking about Party Rock and some other things as well. The AWS Melbourne Well Architected meetup, which started earlier this year, is also back on the 20th of June. There was no much of an agenda yet for them, but it's coming. And the serverless meetup will be back in July. They don't have a meetup this month. They're recovering from running 2 conferences last week in Sydney and Auckland. And that's it. I also saw actually Builders at Night or something like that, a new meetup that announced their next meetup. They usually run the day before us, next week as well, or next month as well, on the 25th. I didn't put a slide in yet because it was literally posted while I was traveling here and I didn't have time to update my slides for that. And that's it for things. Then I'm going to hand it over to Dawn, who will tell us all about the lovely new announcements that AWS brought us. Some of it is even not Gen AI.
Some of it about Gen AI. Hi, there are only 3 of us this week. There are usually 5 of us. We're very depleted, and I'm very tired because I landed here from the US on Monday morning. So, what's new in AWS this month? Finally in Melbourne, Amazon EMR Studio. If you happen to be into doing big data, if you happen to be into using Elastic MapReduce to do your big data, there is a new toy to play with in Melbourne. Amazon RDS Proxy, also available in Melbourne. And for the most underwhelming, finally in Sydney ever, AWS Repost Private. Does anybody here know what AWS Repost is? Silence, awesome. If you want to get answers about how various AWS services work, you go to Repost and you ask a question. It's basically like, I don't know, a Stack Overflow, but for AWS. You can have private instances of that in Sydney now. Someone must do this. Someone must be spending money on this. I have no idea who. Databases. There are a few interesting pieces here. So Amazon RDS extended support APIs are now available. The upshot of this is basically if you happen to still be running MySQL 5.7 or older versions of Postgres, which have gone out of support, you can fork over lots of money to AWS and they will continue providing you security updates for those instances. I would recommend, if you feasibly can, that you upgrade those instances because MySQL 5.7 has been around for a very, very long time. If you can't, and you don't want to fork over lots of money to AWS, you can now turn off extended support through APIs. We've got configurable maximum throughput for DynamoDB on-demand tables, which basically means if you have DynamoDB, if you've not provisioned any specific amount of throughput for it, you can now set hard maximums on that. RDS Performance Insights and the open source AWS Advanced Python Wrapper Driver, which I frankly didn't care to spend too much time trying to figure out what was going on there. Containers. Speaking of upgrade cycles, for anyone who happens to be using Kubernetes and enjoying that new major version every 3 months, Amazon EKS now supports Kubernetes version 1.30. For those of us who don't care so much about Kubernetes, VPC flow logs for ECS is actually a really useful announcement. That's a really good one. Prior to this, VPC flow logs would basically only map traffics. They would only map traffic within a VPC primarily between EC2 instances. Now, if you happen to be using ECS, if you happen to be using ECS Fargate, you can now turn on VPC flow logs for that as well. Beware, if you happen to be using them, particularly if you work for a big company, you will be spending a lot of money for that. But it is the best way to get information about who is using your services and how. Machine learning. Oh boy, I am the least qualified person to talk about this because I have something approximating negative interest in machine learning announcements. I will give this a crack. General availability of Amazon Q Business and Q Developer. All I can really say about that is Amazon Q is a really, really unfortunate name. We have some new models for Amazon Bedrock. This is not necessarily big news, given that, as we were talking about earlier, these new models are being released basically weekly at this point. But if you want to go and try those out, they are there. Agents for Amazon Bedrock now support the provision throughput model. Amazon Bedrock Studio and Amazon Q apps are now in preview. I'm guessing that those will add some sort of new features to Amazon Bedrock and Amazon Q. The long and the short of this is, if you have an interest in generative AI, the guy who's going to give a talk on it later at this meetup is going to be much, much better at conveying any of this information than I can. I am the least qualified person to talk about this. Networking. Amazon VPC Lattice now supports TLS pass-through. Now we're in a world that I can actually sort of explain to some reasonable degree. The deal with TLS pass-through is basically, generally the way that this would work is, if you're running a TLS connection, you would need to terminate the TLS connection once it hits your basically VPC, and then use the data within, which means you lose encryption, and then use the HTTP or HTTPS data to work out where to route it. TLS pass-through allows you to basically infer where the packets need to go without terminating the TLS connection and get them to where they need to be. You used to not be able to do that in VPC Lattice. Now you can. For people who are interested in the security side of networking, this is definitely a good thing to have your head around. Particularly for some big enterprises, I expect this might be a feature that they were waiting on before using VPC Lattice. The Route 53 Resolver DNS firewall now supports domain redirection. More interestingly, ALBs have IPv6 only support for internet clients now. So yeah, the world in general has been really, really trying to make IPv6 a thing, I don't know, probably since I've been alive, for a very, very long time. Amazon is kind of trying to, with a lot of these new announcements, very slowly push people towards being able to use solely IPv6 within AWS, combined with the announcement that, yeah, Amazon is going to be charging for IPv4. We can kind of see where the future's going here. Serverless. The AWS Lambda console now supports sharing test events between developers in additional regions. Basically what it says on the tin. Security. Amazon Cognito introduces tiered pricing for machine-to-machine usage. Very few people, I think, use Cognito, but I'm sure this will be interesting to some people. The Security Hub announcing support for version 3 of the CIS AWS Foundations benchmark is more interesting, because that basically means, yeah, it's improving the utility of Security Hub to work with a more modern version of the benchmark. For enterprises, again, you're probably talking like bigger companies, big enterprises, which are going to be leveraging that. But for anyone who's already using Security Hub, that's useful. That's a very simple change that you can make, or you might get it out of the box. I'm not actually sure. But either way, that's a very simple change that you can make to get more up-to-date security recommendations. Storage. Amazon S3 will no longer charge for several HTTP error codes. Who's been reading blogs recently? Specifically, who's been reading a certain blog by a certain developer who created a certain S3 bucket with a name that was used by a certain piece of open source software, and suddenly found themselves with it was over $1,000 worth of bills from unauthorized requests hitting said S3 bucket? It turns out that if you make enough noise on social media, if you write enough blog posts and you get enough eyeballs on them, someone from on high Amazon will actually come down and change things. So Amazon S3 will no longer charge you for unauthorized requests. I'm not honestly sure why S3 charged for unauthorized requests in the first place, but this is one of those changes which I expect to make a very much bigger difference at the smaller end, small to medium businesses, small companies, because a DDoS attack, which basically directly hits an S3 bucket that you have, can be absolutely, that unauthorized request pattern could be absolutely catastrophic for a small business in terms of spiking their bill. That is now no longer a problem. AWS Control Tower, my favorite AWS service, improves control operations at scale. It's almost getting to the point where Control Tower is actually a useful service that I can recommend that people use outside of very specific niche use cases. Basically, what this allows you to do is it just increases the number of requests that you can make at a time through the APIs and provides better visibility into those requests as they're happening, which is very useful. I am really, really glad that Control Tower has come a long way from the couple of times when I've got up here and said, yeah, you can use it in some very limited use cases. DevOps. AWS Code Pipeline supports stage-level manual and automated rollback. And AWS Code Build now supports managed GitHub runners. Again, I'm not too sure that there are too many people who use these services. The managed GitHub runners and Code Build might get some use for people who want to be solely within the AWS ecosystem. The CloudFormation, CloudTrail integration, and the Delete Stack API are more interesting and are probably going to get broader use just because anyone who uses CloudFormation will be able to get some use out of these. Essentially, the aim here with the Delete Stack API change, the aim being to basically make it so that you can iterate quicker. And the CloudTrail integration, basically making it easier for you to solve problems. Both of these are really good things. Maybe in reaction to a certain announcement about a certain company being bought by a certain other company, a certain company that produces a certain competitor IAC tool. Other cool stuff. AWS Amplify Gen 2 is now generally available. I admit I've not used Amplify in a very long time, but back when I did use it, it's a really good way to quickly stand up small websites, small services. If you need to be able to do that, I'm really keen to see what comes out of AWS Amplify Gen 2. The other one here that would be interesting in my view is the console-based bulk policy migration for billing and cost management, console access, because actually I've just been working on something relevant to this. So last year, AWS looked at the billing permissions that were provided by IAM and went, these are overbroad. So we're going to introduce some new fine-grained billing permissions. But at the time that they did so, and even through the point where they retired the old ones, that migration had to be done manually. The console-based policy migration will allow you to basically just hit a button and it will work. I would still recommend, again, having just dealt with some of this, that you go through and you actually check to make sure that the permissions that you're giving people are appropriate to what they need to be able to do, particularly given that billing access is something that you potentially want to give to a very broad range of people who might not have a great understanding of AWS. But if you just need to be able, if it's a small enough org or your permissions are well-defined enough already, if you just need to be able to click a button, now you can do it. And that is the end of what's new for this month. So I will hand back over to Ian to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Don. That said, there was one piece of news from AWS that we didn't put on slides. It's kind of a big change thing, but probably isn't going to impact anyone so much because it's that they've got a new CEO starting next week. They'll be changing to Matt Garman, who will probably focus on unsurprising things like selling more and Gen AI. So expect more of all the same, but under new leadership. No idea what the actual impact will be, but that's it. Let us now go to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Arad, who is an AWS consultant at Civo with over 14 years of extensive experience in architecture and solution. Beyond working at Civo, he's also a community builder, which is awesome. Welcome to the group. And he's just a great guy.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thanks, Arjun. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bharat Wadhwa, and I am AWS consultant working with Civo. Apologies for the small hindrance in the technical issues. This is the PDF version of my slides, so you will not be able to see the cool animation which I had added in my slides, but I'll try my best. Cool. Brief introduction about me. I am AWS consultant working with Civo. I am also part of AWS Community Builders Program. And I am also self-proclaimed home barista. So recently, I have developed this interest of making coffees at home. And for the first time, I got to know how much actually goes into in making a nice cup of coffee. And this is the picture on the left. You can see that was my attempt on making a latte art. And this picture on the right is from AWS reInvent last year. Civo was kind enough to send me to the reInvent. And actually, that's how the idea of today's session came about. So I attended this particular session in reInvent, and I found it very fascinating because as an AWS consultant or working in AWS ecosystem, we are faced with contrasting priorities on our day-to-day basis, where we have to make some decisions. We have to choose one option over the another. So they presented this particular session there where they showed how we can actually use well-architected framework to make that decisions. How we can make sure we have included our organization's priority into that decision-making process. So I'll be going through that. So that's the agenda today. Before I jump into the actual session, may I know how many of you are aware about well-architected framework? Yep, few. And how many of you have actually run this process on any kind of workload? Slightly fewer. And how many of you have actually taken any action after running this process? Slightly fewer again. Cool. So that's the agenda today. I will be giving a high-level overview of what a well-architected framework is. And then I will jump into some methodologies that we can use when we are doing some trade-offs. And then I'll actually jump into a demo. In the demo, I will take an hypothetical situation. We will run this process on top of it and see how we can use this framework. So let's jump into introduction of well-architected framework. Basically, this framework consists of 6 pillars: operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, efficiency, cost optimization, and sustainability. Each of these pillars basically consists of design principles which AWS recommends that you should follow when you are architecting or designing any application. I always think of it like a blood test, right? If you want to know what is happening inside your body, you can't just put a camera inside and see what's happening. You have to go to doctors, get your blood test done, and the blood report which comes in the end, it has a lot of parameters. Oh, your vitamin D is low, your B12 is low. And then you can take some corrective actions from there. You can take some pills to fix it or eat good food. Similarly, I always think of well-architected framework as a blood report for your workload. Once you run this review process, it basically gives you a report in the end. And it gives you an improvement plan. And then you can take some corrective actions to improve the reliability of your workload. You can make it more cost optimized, you can make it more performance efficient, whatever your organization's priorities are. So what it does, basically, it provides you a mechanism for your cloud journey. I always say that AWS well-architected framework is a journey. It's not a destination. You don't just do it once. You do it in a cyclic process. And some client I have seen doing it quarterly, some client doing it in 6 months' time, and some client do it in a year. So what it does, it basically provides you a model where you need to learn the design principles. Basically, it's like you need to know what are the parameters you are measuring your workload on, what your vitamin D level should be. You can think like that. You need to learn that. And once you learn the design principles, basically, it provides you a set of questions that you can ask against your workload. AWS also provides you a tool for that. You have to just go to the console, define your workload, and it starts asking you a question. And each question has some multiple choice answers under that. And as you answer these questions and move ahead, in the end, it gives you an improvement plan that you can work on. So like I mentioned, so there was a cool animation here. Again, this is a PDF. I can't show you that. But this is a cyclic process that happens, in this review process. And it is three-step process. In the step one, you basically prepare. You try to collect as much as information as you can about this workload in this process. You have to make sure you have the right people in the session who have knowledge about this particular workload that you are analyzing. In the next process, you actually run the review process. Again, you go to the well-architected tool, answer the questions, whatever it has. And once you do that, it gives you an improvement plan. And then you come back after a couple of months to review that. And it cannot be a certain duration, or it can be a major change which has happened in your organization. And that might trigger you to do these kind of reviews. So any question about well-architected framework? Cool. Yep.
Like TOGAF, no? It's a framework that you apply continuously.
That's correct. So it's a framework. So AWS do work with so many clients, right? So they have seen what works with so many clients of different sizes and shapes. And these are recommendations which AWS gives you. It's not like, you have to do it like this. No, these are recommendations. So you can just review your workload on a cyclic basis and get some understand where are the gaps in your workload and work on that. And when we are actually working on implementation, a lot of time we have to do some trade-offs. And these trade-offs can be at different level. It can be at a pillar level. It can be at a best practice level. It can be at a service level, or it can be at a code level. Now, why do we have to make trade-offs? Let's understand why why can't we have everything? Why can't we have performance efficient application? Why can't we have application which is super reliable? It's because different organizations have different priorities. Let's take an example of e-commerce industry. The goal of this particular organization is to buy and sell products on their website as smooth as possible. However, let's say if they are taking some payment transactions on their website, they have to make sure they are compliant also. They are PCI DSS compliant or some industry standard. So these two things are always fighting with each other. And we have to make a trade-off when we are architecting or designing our application. So I'll give you an example. Let's say as to be compliant with the industry, they have to enable users to use multi-factor authentication, right? It might not be a smooth user experience. It might be a little bit trouble for customer to log in, get a one-time password, log into the website. But organization have to make sure that correct user is logging in. the user is authorized. So we have to have a balance between the two. Similarly, let's take an example of financial industry. Operational excellence and security, they are always fighting with each other. For bank, security is the most important thing. They want to release the features on their website and app as fast as possible, but in a secure way. I remember when I started my career, I was working for a bank, and it took a month for my access to be provisioned. But that's the requirement. Like, it has to go to multiple levels of approval process for a bank. And I was working for a startup, and they gave me AWS root account password on day one, right? So it depends that what kind of industry you are working on, and you have to make these architectural decisions based on that. Now, let's have a look how actually we can use well-architected framework when we are making these kind of trade-offs. Again, this slide had a cool animation, but I'll try to explain it. So the first step in the process is you need to understand what are the priorities for your organizations. Is it security? Is it performance efficiency? Is it cost optimization? Is it operation excellency? And in step one, you need to assign a weightage to each pillar, that what is more important for my organization. Once you do that, let's say you are trying to solve a problem, and that problem can be solved by 3 different ways. What you can do in the next step, you have to analyze that option against each pillar and assign a rating to it. And once you do that, you can actually use this formula to assign a weightage to that particular option, where you multiply the weightage of the pillar with the weightage of the option that you are analyzing, and then divide that with the sum of all the weightages of the pillar. This will make more sense when I will actually run the demo. So for demo, let's assume that we have e-commerce website and we are in a prepare step. So what we'll do, we'll try to collect as much as information as we can about this workload in this step. So this is an e-commerce website. It is hosted on AWS. The main goal for this organization is to buy and sell products securely on AWS. And they have a goal of to be available 24/7 with seamless user experience and ensure the data security. And this is the architecture diagram. Again, this is just an example I have taken, but I have taken this example from my live customer I was working with. So let's assume they have one AWS account where they are running their workload, which has Route 53. And they have a single VPC with a public subnet and all the resources deployed in that. So some of you might be looking at it and going, wow, like everything in public subnet? Yes, I have worked with the clients which had architecture like this. So let's jump into the next step, which is a review step. And in the review step, like I mentioned earlier, if you have not seen how the well-architected tool looks like, this screenshot on the left-hand side is for well-architected tool. That's how it gives you a screen to work with. And let's assume after running this process, it has given us few improvement plans that we can work on. Let's say the first step says, okay, we need to have a separate workloads for our, for this particular workload that we are analyzing. And we need to store and use our password securely, make sense. And we have found these gaps after running this process. So this thing in the middle is your actual blood report. So I want you to focus on this particular recommendation which came out of it. It says we need to control traffic at all layers. What does that mean is, if you remember the slide from architecture diagram, They had a single VPC with a public subnet, and all the resources were deployed in that. And after running this review process, it has recommended us that we need to control the traffic at each layer. We should be able to control the traffic, like what's going inside my database, what's going inside my compute layer, to make it more secure. Now, this particular recommendation can be solved by 3 different options. First, we can have a VPC with the subnets, with data subnet, private subnet, and public subnet, so that we can control the traffic at each layer. Or you can have a VPC with a WAF, with web application firewall in the front, which is more secure. Or you can have VPC with a WAF with the Shield Advance in front. That is also more secure. So all of these 3 can option solve your problem. But how do you decide which is the best option for my organization? How do I decide that I am considering my organization's priority into that decision-making process? So these are just options that we can use to fix this problem. Let's run this analysis, which I showed you earlier. The first step is we have to assign a weightage to each pillar. And this weightage can be anything. It can be very subjective for each organization. Have you guys seen how story points works? Each organization has different way of calculating story point. If you go, like, it can be a days of work, 1 story point, or for some organization, it can be a week of work, 1 story point, right? So it's very subjective for each organization how this weightage works. So this is exactly like story points, where you assign a weightage to each pillar, and then you analyze each option against each pillar and assign a weightage to that. Here, I want you to focus on security and cost. If you look at VPC, it's a secure option, but comparatively, VPC and WAF is more secure option. And comparatively, VPC, WAF, and Shield is more advanced, more secure option. So that's why we have rating 1 to VPC, but 5 to VPC, WAF, and Shield. On the other hand, if you look at the cost, VPC is the cheapest option. That's why it has a rating of 5. And VPC WAF is a bit expensive. That's why it has a rating of 3. And VPC WAF and Shield is the most expensive option. That's why it has a rating of 1. After analyzing these options, you can use the formula which I showed you in the previous slide, and you can assign a weightage to each option, which can help you to understand which option might be better for my organization. Now, frankly speaking, on day-to-day basis, when we do these architectural trade-offs, it's very obvious for us, oh, this particular client does not have budget, we can do it like this. Because we have experience, we can look at the design and see what option might be better for my client. However, think about you are new to architecture and designing. You don't know how to decide, right? So in that case, this might be a very powerful tool for you, because you can analyze that option against each pillar and understand, have I thought about security? Have I thought about cost? Have I thought about sustainability? Maybe sustainability is important for my organization. So it gives you a mental model to think about, which is mind-boggling. So I was giving this session in other user group, and one guy reached out to me. He's architect in a very renowned company in Australia. And he was like, I work in an architecture team, and we have 10 architects in the team. Every time I bring us option, everyone just shoots me down, And he found this method really helpful, so that this can give them a common thing to talk about. If someone draws this matrix and someone else comes and says, oh, I don't think this is 5. I think this should be 3. Oh, let's have a discussion. Why do you think so? Right? So it gives you a mental model. It gives you a consistent way to approach to a particular decision when you are architecting and designing. Any question? Cool. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, it's very subjective. It's again like a story point. That's how I can explain it. So it can be 1 to 10, it can be 1 to 20, whatever. But what it does is it gives you a weightage to think about why do you think VPC is 1? Why do you think VPC, WAF, and Shield is 5? Right? It gives you, why do you think it's double the secure? Or you can think it like that, right? So it gives you a point to discuss with the team and come to a common understanding. Why do you think this is more secure than that? So yeah, it's not like a hardcore formula that you need to use 1 to 5 or something. I just took an example, but it can be very subjective to any organization. Yeah.
You have some customers that will come to you and say, we're considering option A, option B.
Yeah.
Is it useful for that as well to show?
Yeah, definitely. I found it very interesting when you have non-technical members, in the meeting. You can show them how we have come to that conclusion. Why do we think that this is more secure? Why do we think that this is a more costly option for you? So this becomes very powerful when you have non-technical members in the team and you can show them how we came to that particular conclusion. Yeah. So frankly speaking, I haven't seen any documentation on this from AWS side. They presented that in reInvent, and they showed an intention to release some documents on this. But this is not something which is specific to AWS or anything. This is a method. It's a semi-quantitative analysis. It can be used anywhere. Right? It can be used in any decision-making process. This is not specific to AWS or architecting. It is used in other principles also. So, yeah. So again, when I think about this particular solution, I'm not considering these weightages. I am thinking about the idea that if you put that, you can actually have a discussion with someone on a common points that you want to discuss on. Definitely. No, that I don't know, but I can share the link from AWS where they mention, this on AWS reInvent slide somewhere. It's there. Any more questions? Cool. So another problem which I have seen at my client sites whenever I go, once we finish this review process, in the end, it gives us 50 things that we can improve on. And how do you decide which is the best thing for me to start with? How do you pick a task which will give you maximum impact with the least effort? To do that, you can use something called a complexity quadrant, where you have low impact on the left-hand side, high impact on the right-hand side, and low complexity at the bottom and high complexity at the top. So what it does is, it gives you a visualization to understand which task will give me the highest impact from the lowest effort. So let's assume we have got these 6 steps from our review process that we can work on. And then we can start putting these tasks on this quadrant. And once you do that, it's very obvious. The thing which has the highest impact and low complexity, you need to start working on that first, because that will give you the maximum output from the minimum input. Any question? Cool. So let's, again, from the example, we decided, okay, VPC and WAF might be a good option for me. And now that's how your final architecture might look like, where we have WAF in the front and we have VPC with the different subnets. So what are the takeaways that I want you to take away from this session is, well, architecture framework can actually give you a mental model to think about when you are making these kind of decisions. And how can we actually use semi-quantitative analysis into the approach when we are making these trade-offs. So what it does is it basically brings your organization's priorities into your decision-making process, which otherwise might be done on a gut feeling. I think that this service is better than that, but this approach might bring your organization's priorities and you make sure these are included into that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Parag. That was very interesting. I can fully endorse the use of well-architected reviews. I've done too many of them. Oh, sorry, I've done many of them. Can't do too many, I guess. With that, we'll go to our next speaker, who is Matt Merrill. Matt is a principal consultant at Mental Group. He's an AWS ambassador, a community builder.
Has been denied presentation.
Has been. You know what? I'm not even going to bother fixing that. I'm just going to make you host, and then you can do what you need to do. Matt also did not bother writing his own bio, which is why I just came up with this. He also helps run this user group, so he's a familiar face.
Okay. So, I am here to talk to you about the current state of generative AI when it comes to AWS. If you have paid any attention to anything AWS has said in the last 7 months, 8 months, you would have heard about generative AI, because apparently everything they do is around generative AI right now. So I thought we could take an opportunity, given Bedrock's been around for about 7 months now, to sort of take a moment and have a look at what AWS currently have in market, what of it may make sense to use in your application or your use case, and what of it is marketing fluff. Along the way, we'll also have a little bit of a conversation around all of the joys that come with leveraging V1 products, because most of their Gen AI is still V1. We're not even a year into this thing when it comes to AWS land. So there are a lot of gotchas and little bits that'll trip you up along the way if you're not aware or not expecting them. And it can make what can be a very simple task be incredibly convoluted and tricky. So before I sort of start going down the rabbit hole, who here is sick of hearing about generative AI? Raise your hand. Cool. Not as many as I thought. Of those who aren't sick of hearing about it, is there anything particular that interests you about it? Is it developer capability, things like, Copilot, or is it its ability to generate content? What is it about generative AI that interests you? By the way, this is going to be a interactive session, so little bit of feedback might be beneficial. Or is it just it's interesting and fascinating and we just like to hear about it? Cool. Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. How many of you have used ChatGPT? All right, everybody. How many of you have used Copilot or some similar code or developer assistance tool? So most people in the room. Okay, cool. All right. So Does anybody know much about what's in market other than there's Bedrock and there's Q and there's other stuff? Has anybody actually done a lot of playing with Bedrock? Anybody done anything with Party Rock? Few people. Has anybody done anything with Amazon Q or any of the Amazon Q products? Little bit, few hands coming up here and there. Okay, cool. That sort of helps level set a little bit. When it comes to, so we'll start at the beginning. When it comes to AWS, you saw the What's New segment this evening, the machine learning slide. By far has more announcements than any other category in the AWS product suite at the moment. In fact, if you have a look at the What's New, there are probably dozens of ML-related announcements every month. We have a system that goes through and pulls out every AWS announcement, throws them in a big DynamoDB table, and then scrapes them for which category they each belong to. The machine learning one is like an order of magnitude larger than the next biggest one, and has been all year. But when it ultimately boils down to it, and let's click OK to this, I wanted this to be a very slide light session. So if we just do a quick draw IO, sure, that'll be fine. And we just zoom in here. We effectively have 3 tiers of products in the AWS space, right? When it comes to generative AI. And it basically goes in order from easiest to consume and to set up and use to most complicated. And at the top, you've got Amazon Q. And this is a suite of products. You've got Q Business, you've got Q Developer, you've got Q QuickSight, Q Connect, and Q Supply Chain currently in preview. And the point of all of these services is all of the machine learning stuff under the hood is taken care of by AWS. So it is very much I want a chatbot, give me a chatbot. I want a developer experience like Copilot, give me one of those. And all of the intricacies around what model or what are the weightings and all of that sort of stuff is just taken care of by AWS, and you don't need to worry about all of that. The entry point is obviously a lot higher from a price perspective because, well, AWS are doing more work for you. Right? But it's a lot easier and a lot quicker to get started. In fact, with something like Q Business, which is their chatbot, you know, write a blog post, you know, give me some answers, query this data set, etc. You can build an application, and we will a little bit later, in about 6 minutes from start to finish. So very easy to get started, very easy to set things up, very easy to get going. Devil's in the detail when it comes to some of that stuff, and we'll cover off a few of those points. The next layer down, if you want a little bit more control, you want to be able to control what models you're using, how things behave, the guardrails, you know, all of those sorts of bits and pieces, is Bedrock. All right? That's sort of your middle tier. You've got APIs to be able to integrate with everything. You can put it in your own application. It's got chatbots, it's got images, it's got embeddings, it's got all of that fun stuff that we've gotten to know over the last 18 months or so. This is where the grunt of their Gen AI stuff goes, right? Because it gives you the tools to be able to build and customize and do whatever it is that you want to do by just leveraging one of the foundational LLMs and going from there, right? Gives you a lot of power, a lot of flexibility. It's a little bit cheaper than Amazon Q. It's more of the per token model as opposed to the per user model. But you've got to do a lot more of it yourself. Now, again, we'll get into a little bit more of the detail in a little bit when it comes to things like Bedrock Studio and how they've started to make things a little bit easier. But again, it's a V1 product. There's a lot of asterisks when it comes to that. The bottom layer is the hold my beer for me, please layer, where you really get into the nuts and the bolts. And we're just going to call this the infrastructure layer. This is where your infrastructure, this is where your Inferentia chips, this is where your Elastic GPUs, this is the SageMaker. I'm going to build my own LLM from the ground up and, you know, make it work exactly the way I want. you're a machine learning engineer that knows what they're doing and has a bottomless stack of money that you want to burn through, right? Because this is training it from your own data set. This is, it is the most custom, all right? It is the most powerful, but it is also, the most complicated by at least an order of magnitude, right? There are jump starts, there are playbooks, there are getting started guides in SageMaker to help you along the journey. But this is real in the weeds level stuff. And you've got a lot of flexibility and as to how you train, what you train, how you consume it, how you scale, we won't spend a lot of time in that area tonight because that's a series of presentations in and of itself. We'll be focusing mainly on these two areas. But if you the theory is, if you start with the Q products, do a proof of concept, realize that you want a little bit more flexibility, you move into Bedrock, you do your stuff in there, and then you realize, hey, you know what would be really cool? Rather than trying to make this particular LLM work the way I want it to, I need to train my own model and make it work exactly the way I need it to. That's where we start getting into the infrastructure stuff. So it's sort of a tiered approach. So, does that all make sense? Everybody got the high level? Cool. If we start off with the nice and simple, and forgive me, I'm just living the joys of having a Zoom toolbar on my screen. All right, so if we start off with the fun stuff, Amazon Bedrock, we'll start with Bedrock, we'll move up to Q. Amazon Bedrock. Amazon Bedrock, if you've been paying attention, was announced in Sydney last month in time for, was it last month or the month before? In time for Summit. Yay, joy, we now have generative AI capability onshore, which means we're not shipping all of our data overseas, training our models in US, which is a huge problem for a lot of companies. So that's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? We can go to our Bedrock service, we can move ourselves into the Sydney region, we can come down to our models, because the first thing you've got to do when you're in Bedrock is tell AWS what model you want to use. So you come down into your model access, we come in, we enable the models, and there's only 10 models. For a company that can do nothing but announce new models coming into Bedrock and all of those sorts of things, that doesn't feel like a lot of models. And it's not. You'll actually notice that a lot of the new models that AWS have been announcing are not here. Bedrock is in Sydney, but if we go back somewhere like North Virginia, we'll notice that there's 3 times the number of models available in the US that there are in Sydney. In fact, most of our embedding models are available in the US, but if we go back to Sydney, only 3 of them are. And we only have 2 vision models, whereas in the US, we have more. So there's also no stability AI in Sydney. So if you want to do those cool, draw me a picture, I need some content for my PowerPoint presentation, again, not available in Sydney yet. This is the age-old problem. We've seen it 1,000 times when it comes to AWS region, in parity. More models will come. The general theme, I haven't been able to lock anybody at AWS down to saying one way or the other, but the general consensus seems to be the older models won't come to Sydney because chances are you're going to want the newer models. So for things like what would be Claude, they're probably not going to bother bringing Claude 2 to Sydney, because chances are you're going to want to use Claude 3 because it's newer and better and more powerful. If you want to use Claude 2, you've got to ship your data to the US. That's the way it is. Once we've gone and enabled our models, we can then start going and building things. Playground is a great place to get started, right? You want to start learning something, you do it in the playground. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? We can come in here, we can select a model. Let's pick an Anthropic. Let's go Claude 3. Right, done, on demand, right? And we can say, write me a 500 word social media post on how great Azure is. Because You know, if I'm going to use an AWS tool, I'm going to do something fun. Boom, there you go. We've all seen this. We know how this works. It's the same as ChatGPT. It's the same as all of those sorts of things. You type in a prompt, it's going to give you a response. Great, fantastic. You know, the nice thing about this, even if you're not building this in a tool, even if you're not, doing any of those sorts of things, you can actually go in, enable it, like grab yourself a new AWS account, grab yourself the existing AWS account, go in, enable the model, come into the playground and start using it like ChatGPT and not have to pay $20 a month for the latest and greatest. All right? So you can just come in here, link up your playground, and off you go to the races. This will charge you per token. It's like fractions of a cent. Like think Lambda level pricing, right? Like it's fractions of a cent per 1,000 tokens, rah, 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 rah. So unless you're like smashing the bejeebers out of it and doing like 90% of your work through a chatbot all day, every day, chances are this will be cheaper than what ChatGPT Pro is currently costing you. Right, we can do the same thing with text. We can do the same thing with images. This is all stuff that we know, right? Where this starts to get a little bit interesting is if we're going to build this into an application, we then want to do things like guardrails. So when we're talking about ChatGPT, when we're talking about, chatbots in general, the big thing that everybody always likes to talk about is, getting them to, swear at you, getting them to be racist, getting them to be, picking on minorities and all of those sorts of things that everybody gets into the news for. AWS has tried to make this pretty simple. You can create guardrails around your models. So we can go a dummy guardrail. And we can go next. And we're going to want to filter our prompts and we're going to want to filter the responses. And basically, we get to set a confidence level for each of these. How confident are you that this is hate speech or sexual in nature or it's misconduct or it's a prompt intended to change the behavior of the chatbot itself? Low confidence, medium confidence, high confidence, right? Click, set the bar where you want. It is literally that complicated, right? And we can do the same for our responses. Do we want to deny any specific topic? So we might want to deny anything related to anything to do with gambling. Now, where you're defining the topic is just native speech because the LLM is actually reading this to interpret what you want it to filter out. So literally anything to do with gambling is probably not actually a good topic definition. You probably want to flesh that out. Anything to do with online gambling, blah, 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 something, standard prompt engineering stuff. But we're just putting in exactly what we want, natural speak. Confirm, we can go in, we can continue to add topics till our heart's content. What if we want to filter profanity? That's pretty easy, it's a tick box. Particular phrases or particular words, we can add them in manually, or we're lazy because we're DevOps engineers and we only do things if we can automate them. Upload it from an S3 bucket. That way I can just keep on adding my list to the S3 bucket and then it can keep on ingesting it from the S3 bucket. So that as we monitor the usage of our chatbot, we can feed the data back into the S3 bucket to continually improve the experience of our model. What about PII? Let's filter out anything, driver's licenses or VIN numbers or license plates. Let's say I'm doing something for Vic Roads. Done. And we're just going to block that, and license plates will mask. Done. If there isn't a particular PII type that we want to filter out, we've got our good old friend regex because, as we know, nothing beats sitting there trying to make a regex string do what you want it to do. So feel free to do that in your chat AI bot now. Blocking message. What do we want it to do when it actually blocks and says that you can't do this? That's pretty simple. Done. That's a guardrail. We've just set up and controlled how people can use our chatbot. Right? So this makes it a lot easier to start, not just having a fully open environment that people can start abusing. We've also got things like agents. Now, agents, I'm going to come back and do a separate topic, a separate presentation just on agents. But at its core, agents The problem with LLMs, the problem with foundational models at the moment is really simple. And I think Mike Chambers summed this up the best. What happens when you ask ChatGPT what the current time is? The answer is it doesn't work. It doesn't know the current time because it's been trained on a data set. And you can't feed current information into a static data set. Agents solve that problem. Agents give you the ability to write Lambda functions that give the ability to the foundation or the LLM to interact with other things. So you could write a Lambda function called getTime and then publish that to the foundation or to the LLM and have it now be able to produce, give you the time. Well, great, fantastic. The time's at the top right-hand corner of my screen, so probably not particularly useful. Where this gets interesting is like something I'm doing at the moment is integrating Bedrock into my Google Calendar, which is just an API call because you can just use the Google Calendar API, and integrating it into my timesheeting application for work, which is just a Salesforce application. Again, not particularly difficult to write. It's got a native API and all that sort of stuff. And now all of a sudden I can tell Bedrock, take a look at what I did this week in my calendar and do my timesheet for me. It will read my calendar, which it can understand because it's just natural language. And then it can translate that into a set of tasks that it needs to submit via API into my timesheeting application. And all of a sudden, Bedrock can do a task every week that as a consultant, I absolutely hate. So agents are a very, very powerful function of Bedrock. And as I say, I'll come back and do another presentation in a month or two as to, I'll show you some really cool use cases that we're currently working on when it comes to Bedrock. Moving on, I know we're almost at 8 o'clock. We're running a little bit behind tonight, but I'll move on to Q. Q is an overarching name for, as I said, the managed service portions of generative AI. Now, Q, we'll start off with Q Business. Q Business is the nice, lovely chatbot application. All right? We go into Amazon Q Business. We click Create Application. Well, actually, let's back up a bit here. All right? Let's try and do Q in Sydney. Oh, we can't do Q in Sydney because Amazon Q Business doesn't exist in Sydney. Well, that's annoying. All right, well, guess we're going to North Virginia. We go in North Virginia, we say create application, we say my dummy app. And the very first thing it says is stuff you. You're an Australian customer who set up your identity center part of your control tower in the Sydney region because you wanted your identity to be in Sydney because, well, you're an Australian customer. Go use the Amazon Q Business instance that's in Sydney. Oh, there isn't one yet. First problem with Q Business, your Q Business instance and your Identity Center instance need to be in the same region, which currently means your Identity Center instance needs to be in the US. So if you've gone and configured Control Tower to reside in Sydney, or you've gone and configured your Identity Center to reside in Sydney, you're snookered. You cannot use Q Business right now. Now, you can run an instance of Identity Center within an account, within an existing Identity Center environment and do like a sandbox, and it does technically work, but now you've got an Identity Center within an Identity Center, and as if identity is not a big enough pain in the neck already. So there is technically a workaround, but it's a painful one. If you want to play with it at the moment, the best piece of advice I can give you, go to aws.amazon.com, sign up for a new account with a throwaway email address, whack your credit card number in there and do it that way. Don't try and integrate it into the existing one. It is just too painful. So that's what we have here. I have one of my many, many throwaway AWS accounts that has Q Business. Now, I want to create a Q Business application. So I click Next, and you'll notice that I've already got two there. Let's create a quick application. My chatbot. Create. That's going to go away, create the service role, do all the IAM things that need to be done in the background. And voila, I can now come in here and I can assign a user from my existing identity center whose name is Jim, because of course it is. He needs a Q Business or a Q Lite license. Quick thing on Q Business pricing. Q Business pricing is technically still in preview mode until the end of June. So it's free. Yay. Come July 1, it is very not free. It is $4 a user for the Lite version. It is $20 a user for the Pro version. That is per named user, not per active user. So be careful, is what I will say to that. Yes? Jim is one user. No, it is one license, regardless of how many applications they're in. Right, so that is the one saving grace. So you can have many applications, but you're only paying for one license. But he has a Pro license, so he's going to start costing $20 a month. There are two facets when it comes to pricing for Q Business. There is the per user license price, which is $4 or $20, depending on whether or not you want Lite or Pro. You want Pro. I'll get into that in a minute. And then there's the indexing of the data. We've just created an application, all well and good. Doesn't really do much at the moment. All right. But what we can do is, so if we come in here, actually, if we go back to applications, and we'll show you this. Right, my chatbot, web experience. This is an application that is now officially published in, so if I go to my AWS Identity Center portal as Jim, say I'm logged in as Jim, and refresh that, what you will see is dummy Scratch app. And there's my chatbot when it loads, because I'm on my mobile phone and internet not so good. Yeah, I'm being a little slow. Yeah. That one. There is my app. Right, and I can interact with it the same way that I could with my Bedrock. It's a nice, readily accessible public URL as opposed to buried in the playground section of the Bedrock service within my AWS console that I'm probably logged into in another account anyway. That's great. I'm now effectively just replaced ChatGPT, which costs $20 US a month, with Q Business, which costs $20 a month. Not particularly useful at this point in time, but where this gets a little bit interesting is, so we go into test app. We have this thing here called data sources, and we can click in here and we can say a data source. The most popular are obviously S3 or web crawler and upload files. So we could literally just come here, upload files, upload all the company corporate documents, and all of a sudden I've got a chatbot that can answer questions around all of our corporate documents. We could have our information security, manual. We could have privacy policies, remote access, remote working policies, all that sort of stuff. And all of a sudden, people and culture now have a chatbot that will tell everybody everything they need to know about all of the company policies and procedures. Yay! Go one step further. Tie that to an S3 bucket, and now whenever any of those documents get updated, we're automatically going to be able to re-ingest those into the index, and now we're going to be able to have them updated in real time or near real time. So isn't that great? Fantastic. And it's the standard stuff. It's, what's the name of the bucket? What's the, IAM permission that has access to the bucket? Blah, 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 blah. All the standard stuff. How frequently do you want me to, scan the bucket? Oh. My documents aren't stored in S3. My documents are stored in Google Drive. Wow. Give it permission to your Google Drive, and now all of a sudden, Q Business can scrape your Google Drive. Now you've got access to all of your company's documents. Of course, assuming you live in Google land. If you live in Microsoft land, you're for some reason, I haven't been able to work this out myself, but there seems to be fewer Microsoft integrations than there are other providers. Don't know why that is. Gmail. Now I have an LLM that understands all of my emails. Where this gets interesting is you can then tell it to start replying to your emails if you integrate like an agent like I was talking about before. But not only can it reply to emails, but it's got all of the previous emails that you've written, so it can do it in your tone of voice. So it doesn't sound like ChatGPT anymore. It now sounds like you. I'm not necessarily saying this can be used for nefarious purposes, but yeah, feels like a good use of $20 to me. Confluence, GitHub, Exchange, OneDrive, all this, Slack, right? Ingest your company's Slack. That's, probably not going to get anybody into trouble. I don't think Slack and ML that hasn't caused any problems for anybody recently. The point is, this is the easy thing. This is, don't want to know about the models underneath, just give it access to the data, let it do its thing. Where it becomes really powerful is when you actually throw it a prompt, and I was going to set an example up, I just ran out of time this week, is when I ask it, so if we take that example before around uploading all the company's documents, let's say we upload all the company's policy documents into the S3 bucket, and I say, what is am I allowed to install a VPN application on my company laptop? And it comes back and it says no. It will also provide you a link to where it got that information. So one, that it's not hallucinating, which we all know can be a big problem when it comes to LLMs. And two, if you don't have the confidence, or it's great, but this has got the potential to get me fired, let me just double check, you can still go and have a look at the actual piece of information where it pulled that out. Now, that becomes a little bit more cool when we think about things and services that may not necessarily have the world's greatest search capability, like Confluence, for example. I'm not necessarily ragging on Confluence, but I don't know about anybody else's experience, but whenever I go to look for something, the search seems to have a hard time finding it. If I can whack it into something like Q Business, that's a hell of a lot easier. So when I come back and talk about agents, we'll talk about some of this stuff as well, because I can show you how the two sort of go hand in hand. But the takeaway is, if you're wanting to get started with generative AI and you want to do a little bit more than is currently available with some of the public products, you want to ingest your own data, have a look at Q Business. Set yourself up an account, set yourself an identity center instance in the US, ingest some data, and off you go. All right, $20, probably be $20 and some cents, because it's got to index all that data. So unless you're a massive data hoarder, it's not going to cost you that much money. And you can start doing some really cool things with it. If you're a little bit more developer inclined and you want to have a little bit more of a play, go for Bedrock. Give it a stretch, play with the different models, give yourself access. That is a $0 start, a $0 entry point. And you're only going to pay for what you use. The other thing is, if you're a friend of AWS, or if you're a community builder, or you attended a meetup or something and they gave you some free credits, credits do now work with Bedrock. They didn't used to, they do now. So if you've got any of those freebie credits, I'm looking at community builders, I'm looking at ambassadors in the room, you now have the capability to use them. And if you're someone who's sitting here going, yeah, that's all well and good, but I want to train my own model, feel free to come and talk to me afterwards, because we'd love to get you up here to give a presentation, because you're well beyond my point at that point in time. So I want to hear from you, not the other way around. Anybody got any questions, queries, concerns, thoughts, issues? Yes, you first.
How would it work with respect to web crawler?
Aha, the web crawler. So, web crawler. Literally, give it the URL and give it a sitemap, give it whatever you've got. So you could literally just go source URL, HTTPS, and let's just go the ATO. Let's train a chatbot for tax professionals. Does the website require authentication? In this case, it doesn't. Do we need to run it through a proxy because we need to do some funky things with, crawl bots or anything like that? Does it need a secret? Do we need it to run from a VPC? No, we don't in this instance. We don't need to do anything crazy. How do we want to handle subdomains? That sort of stuff. URL patterns, if we would need to do regex, filter anything out specifically. Do we want to do full syncs? Do we want to do like updates and changes and all that sort of stuff? How do we want to handle the specifics of the individual HTML documents? That's it, hit go. And it'll go and do its thing. It is literally that complicated. The one thing that's problematic with web crawlers at the moment, you get near zero feedback as to what went wrong if something fails. That's just a V1 problem. I've raised that with AWS and told them that you need a little bit more. Why is this not working? That goes for a lot of the plugins for Q Business, but specifically the web crawler one seems to be annoyingly painful. But that seems to only really be websites where, for example, I didn't realize that 3 layers deep there was a partner login to the website, that it's then gone to scrape and can't get in because I didn't give it any authentication because I didn't realize that there was an authenticated part of the website. Probably not that big a deal because if I didn't know there was a password protected part, I probably wasn't looking for that part of the data anyway. But yeah, it's literally that hard. I was toying with one the other day that I told to go and scrape all of Jeff Barr's blogs off the AWS news page because I want to write a bot that will then generate content to see if I can replace Jeff Barr with a Jeff Barr bot. A Barr bot. Yeah, and it seemed to work pretty well. Or at least the scraping bit did. The other bit I was trying to do, not so much, but that's hardly a web crawler's fault. Who else had a question? Yes.
You have to fill up the AI with data. You use some confidential data, even if it's for internal use.
Yes.
If that data just stays on your account, or
yes.
or AWS can.
No. When it comes to Q, when it comes to Bedrock, they are all private instances. So your data gets used to train your instance of your model, and that's as far as it goes. It does not pull back. It does not feed back to a centralized model for AWS. It has got all the same level controls, security controls that the rest of your AWS environment has. There is none of that, sucking it all back to the mothership so that we can build the mother of all, LLMs kind of thing. For the specific reason that if they did that, they know nobody would use the service. Right? Like that's ultimately what we're talking about here is if the data didn't remain private, then nobody would give it the data, so nobody would use the service because it's no better than any of the other services that are out there. So AWS takes the data protections when it comes to training LLMs and foundational models incredibly seriously. There is a whole page. I'll put it in the user group Slack channel tomorrow. The links to the specific privacy documents around how they handle that, because it goes into a lot of detail. Yes. For Q Business, unknown. And it's changing all the time. AWS will not tell us what model Q Business is currently using. And when I spoke to them the other week about it, they said it's not because we don't want to tell you. It's because they are constantly iterating models and versions and all of that to make it work better and better. And what they tell you today may not be that tomorrow. So rather than tell you inaccurate information, it's running the model that's currently doing it the best. And they will continue to iterate that as a part of it being a managed service. Any other questions? Nope. Yes. Yes. So you put the data, so for example, if we set up one of these data sources, AWS will ingest that data and put it into, so if we have a look, I'll show you very quickly. Retriever settings. Actually, let's go back here. We have a look in here because I think I set it up in, this one's got the, yeah. Here we go. Anyway, when it comes to setting up your instances, you can define what retriever you want to put it in. And there's two options for your retrievers. There is the Amazon Q managed internal retriever, which keeps it within the Q business instance within that specific account. Or the other option, in which case it's controlled by Identity Center, right? The users that you give access to the application are the only users or groups that will be able to access that application and by extension, the model that's attached to it. The other option for retrievers is to use your own Kendra database, your own Kendra instance or cluster, upon which it basically comes down to whatever security controls you've got against your Kendra instance, right? So if you're crazy enough to open that up to the public internet, well, that's on you because, well, it's your instance, and shared responsibility model pretty clearly outlines what happens when you set a security group that's 0000. But if you are applying any kind of basic level of security, your Kendra database is going to be behind, in a internal subnet, not publicly available, which is why when we were configuring all of these up, they were all asking around VPCs, right? Because that's going to come into play if you're using an internal Kendra instance. Cool. If there are any other questions or anything, happy to answer them at the back after the session. If anybody wants me to do another session at a later date around anything specific, Gen AI, agents, or anything along those sorts of lines, feel free to let me know, and happy to come back and talk at a later date.
Thank you, Matt. Cool. That brings us to an echo. Let's see. It went back on. Cool. Now, without an echo, we'll go back to this one. A marketplace segment, as I said, this gives everybody a couple, 30 seconds to say we're hiring, looking for people, things like that. If you are, please raise your hand, bring a microphone that works. I'll just start it off. I work at Mental Group. We just today reopened our women and gender minorities traineeship, which is focused on women and gender minorities who either want to switch a career into tech focused or are new to a career. It's an award-winning, since last week, it's an award-winning traineeship program. It's really good. We've had like 80-something people go through it already in the past. If you or somebody you know might be interested, go to the website, mentalgroup.com.au. I'm sure there's a big banner or something about it. We also have other roles, but this is the one that I want to highlight. Anybody else? Nobody? It's a great economy at the moment, isn't it? Then all I want to do, what's left to do, is to thank our sponsors, Mentor Group, CIFO, and NAB. And of course, our speakers, Bharat and Matt. And hopefully we'll see you all again next month for new talks, less technical hiccups, and just a lot of fun. Thank you all for coming, and see you next time.